for the record, we're at the grand opening announcement of the COMMPUTERSEUM. This is a press conference. It's on February 14th, 1995. That's Valentine's Day. It's also the morning of a pretty good snowstorm. So hopefully that's the reason why we haven't had an opportunity to see as much of the press and much as the Toronto media, especially, as we had planned. But in attendance, we do have our representative from the City of Waterloo, who will give us an affirmation about this undertaking. And also, for the record, I'd like to go over at least a bit of what was planned to take place today. And if everything goes according to a plan, then Mike Williams should be calling us from Philadelphia in a little while. Now, the COMMPUTERSEUM is Canada's first computer museum. It's also the first computer museum in the world that's dedicated to the preservation of the history of data processing and office automation. And hence, we've discovered that the best way to describe this museum is by calling it the Commercial Computing Museum. So as we open today's festivities at the press conference, I'll announce the logo for the COMMPUTERSEUM. And it's a simple logo. It uses a particular pet name called the COMMPUTERSEUM, which is a contraction of Commercial Computing Museum. So I know that we're going to get nothing but spelling mistakes for its entire history. Nobody will put the double M's in. But you've heard it here for the first time, and this is quite an interesting name. For the computer museums that do exist, nobody's ever thought of putting it together in that fashion. I also like to draw your attention to the fact that the sign is bilingual, in full recognition of the fact that this is Canada's first computing museum. It just happens to be in Waterloo, Ontario, but that will not at all limit us in our scope and in our mandate. This is a unique undertaking, and one that's appropriate for the times in many ways. From a historical point of view, if there wasn't a serious effort to preserve computer artifacts now, we would lose those artifacts forever. In fact, we'd lose any physical evidence of the computing technology that took place before today. Now, from an economic point of view, if we waited for government funding, we'd have to wait a long time. We deliberately avoided government funding because of the strained economic times that we're in, and also on an ethical basis, saying that there are very many more important things for governments to be funding aside from a computer museum. So here's a catch-22. We either wait for funding and run the risk of losing the artifacts that would be necessary to open a museum, or we open a museum and struggle with the lack of funding. And those are probably two contemporary alternatives. We put together a third alternative, a third view. And that is, we think we've built an organization that's suitable for today's economy. So instead of trying to build what we'd say is an industrial age organization based on rigid structures and precepts and a high regard for the outside, so for instance like building a special edifice just for the COMMPUTERSEUM, what we've done is built what we think is an information age organization based on appropriateness and flexibility and a high regard for content or for what's inside. So I think that's probably demonstrated in the fact that we've got press kits, we've got coffee, and we've got 4 people here, including my mom. But in any case, I do appreciate you coming. But that just goes to show that we felt that this was a necessary step for us to take, and it's been taken, and we'll enjoy what we can from it. Now, there's much more that I could record, and I will at a later time, but I would like to ask Councillor Mike Connolly from the City of Waterloo to come forward, and if you could face the camera and us and say something. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Kevin. It's speaking to audience like this reminds me of when I used to run as councillor sometimes, you know. My wife would be there and she'd applaud, that'd be it. Kevin, we know you from the city because you worked with us on the Economic Development Committee. And it's my pleasure to bring greetings to you from the council and personally from the mayor, and to virtually endorse what you're doing. We feel it's very great. It's now 50 years since we started this business of computer setting, and we've gone from 30-ton full-room machines to laptop desks, from valves to transistors to microchips, to doubling the capacity now every 2 years of what they can take. So Where will it stop? No one knows. But the thing is, let's start with seeing what we have, and I think it's a great thing you've got to preserve. And we're delighted to any politician, of course, when you talk about funding, and you're saying you're going to raise the funds as opposed to tax us with it. That really is great. So we would hope that everyone will work with you and the schools to really make this venture workable. And perhaps in 4 or 5 years' time, we'll see this word down here in the Webster's dictionary, with any luck. So we wish you the very best of luck from the councillors of the City of Waterloo. We're delighted you're doing it in Waterloo, of course. This is the other reason we fought all the snowstorms to come here. The city should pick Waterloo. So I hope everything goes well, and I'm sure it will. The very best. Thank you.
I would like to jump right ahead to essentially wrap up the session, but and as I say, we will record some more for our own museum archives. But I would like to say that in the future, our goal is definitely to pursue our own building, complete with amphitheater for educational activities, also a rentable facility for other press conferences, and we'd also like to see a restaurant, a library, specifically a library for our own archives, documentation, books, etc. Rentable meeting rooms. We're in this high-tech community, and off-sites are very popular these days. So these are things in the Computerseum's future, and lacking them won't stop us from opening today. But also in the future, we hope to create jobs. And it's not a political statement at all, but the fact that we see ourselves not just as a preservation or a repository, but we're also an organization or a body that will promote activities related to the preservation of the history of computers. So there is opportunities, I think, for us to engage in research, for us to be well connected with other museums around the world, loaning equipment, receiving equipment, collaborating, and in such having a staff of people to perform those services to the museum community and hence the public, but also to act as guides and people who would be responsible to actually restore the older systems once we acquire them. So yeah, it definitely is in our mandate to be a job-building organization eventually. So just before, there is Mayor Christie from the City of Kitchener was planned to be here, and we don't have anything from the Mayor's office to contradict that, although we'll proceed with the facts from Elizabeth Whitmer, the MPP for Waterloo North, and it's an affirmation that the museum will be the first of its kind in the world which is dedicated to documenting and preserving the history of data processing and office automation. And it's appropriate we do this here since our community is nationally recognized and even internationally for its excellent post-secondary computer programs and the strength and diversity of our local high-tech industries. Also, several peer organizations in the States sent us some congratulatory notes from the Charles Babbage Institute, which runs out of the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. There are precious few efforts aimed at preserving through archives or objects the industry that has brought so much change to our society. With such rapid change comes an ever-increasing need for society to understand where it has been. The Charles Babbage Institute was founded on the same vision and concern for the loss of this heritage that brought the Computerseum to its grand opening. And the CBI wishes us at the Computerseum every success and look forward to a growing partnership in the history of computing. And from the venerable Computer Museum in Boston, how fitting that the inauguration of your Computerseum on February 14th coincides with the 50th anniversary of the ENIAC. As the first recognized electronic digital computer ushered in a new age of computing 50 years ago, your newly founded repository takes an equally important step in furthering the preservation of the history of computing technology. And finally, from the Computer History Association of California, as CHAC, as the acronym for that organization, works to create a museum of its own between now and the turn of the century, We will gratefully profit from the COMPUTERSEUM's inspiring example. With the help and support of our local communities, both the Computer History Association of California and the COMPUTERSEUM look forward to the establishment of world-class facilities, which will be of enduring interest to historians and tourists alike. So it definitely is what we needed at this point in time. And I want to thank Councillor Connolly for coming forward, and for Doug McKenzie from the City of Waterloo also for coming, and for Claudette, and I forget your name. Claudette Foy from the KW Visitor and Convention Bureau, and my mother Eileen. So we'll close off with this right